Good evening, this is Angela with Progress Permaculture. I have very stained hands from picking mulberries just a little bit ago. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you all about something that's been on my mind the last few days. I posted in a local women in homesteading in the Portland area group about how frustrated I was with a number of failures in my permaculture garden this year. That after 14 years here, I was seeing things fail that have never failed before. Raspberries. In fact, I have a recent video about how we had to go raspberry picking to augment our raspberry stash in the freezer for the winter. I also have exactly one peach right now, when normally I have baskets of peaches off my one small Oregon curl-free peach tree. I have almost no cherries this year. My cherries were hit very hard, just like my peach. My cherries were hit incredibly hard by our very late, in fact, past our last frost date, hard freeze and snowfall right as they were blooming. So I lost most of my cherry blossoms, and the few that did set fruit got brown rot due to the cool, rainy weather that we've had. Unprecedented, bizarre weather. That's what happened with my peaches as well. They had all of their blossoms frozen off. That happened to a number of my plums. I got 3 plums off my early Laxton plum this year, and I think my Bavay's Green Gage, I will probably get 3 or 4 plums off of it as well. All of the blossoms frozen. So I was, expressing this frustration, like, y'all, ladies, am I the only one? Am I the only one? Am I, a failure as a permaculturist? Like, of course, as a really sort of a high achieving person, I tend to suffer from a lot of imposter syndrome, and which I think can be common for folks who are attempting to try to do something that is bucking the norm, that is different from following the beaten path. We can often suffer from imposter syndrome when things don't go 100% perfect. I probably will make a video on that soon, because I think that I have a lot of knowledge to impart, since I struggle with that a lot. So I'm like, am I the only one? Everybody in the group said, nope, my raspberries suck this year. All my raspberries got rot. All of my stone fruit has 0 fruit set. Most of my apples had their blossoms freeze. This is the worst year in more than a decade, perhaps 2 decades, for fruit in our gardens. So while I feel terrible that other folks are suffering the way that I'm suffering, particularly homesteaders and folks who perhaps more rely on the harvest out of their gardens in order to feed their families, and who really count on that when budgeting, especially in a period of high inflation like we're in right now, it was good to hear that I was not alone. Just takes that imposter syndrome down a notch. Like, it's not just you, Angela. You're not the only one having a freak year this year. And I was thinking about, does that mean permaculture doesn't work? If we do permaculture so that we have a system in which we feed the soil, we have stronger plants, we therefore have reduced disease and pest pressure. If we get diseases like root rot in raspberries that have had a thriving patch for a decade and a half, like brown rot on cherries that have never had it before, does that mean that permaculture isn't working? No, it actually means that permaculture is working. We can have freak weather events that put undue stress on our plants that is outside the norm. In a normal year, I would have buckets of pie cherries. I would have gallons of red raspberries. Strangely enough, my golden raspberries over here, fine. I got a big harvest of them, and I'm anticipating a big harvest again in the fall because they're twice bearing. But my red raspberries, screwed. So when we see things produce really well year after year, and then we have undue pressure on the system, strange weather events, strange pressures, a drought, or very late frosts, things like that, we may have unexpected losses. That doesn't mean our permaculture system is failing. In fact, it means that we are more likely to succeed. We are more resilient because we have a permaculture system in the first place. Imagine if I was an orchardist and all I grew were stone fruit. This would be a catastrophic year. In fact, the U-Pick place that we went to normally sells cherries, and they said, we have no cherry harvest this year. Absolutely none. No cherries at all available. So for me, what I have tried to do to help me orient myself positively, to help focus and kind of re-strategize, okay, my staple crops that I really value and stock the freezer with, some of my plums, my peaches, my raspberries that I do canning with and preserving with, Can't rely on those this year. So perhaps I'm going to go visit other local producers who did have more success, and I'm going to purchase from them. But I'm also going to look at my permaculture system and say, what is filling in the gaps? So in a permaculture system, we are more likely to be resilient. We are more likely to succeed even in those periods of difficulty, even in those periods where we are being tested, where our garden is being tested, because we have put diversity into our system. So for me, yes, I'm having a hard time with my stone fruit. I'm having a hard time with my raspberries. But do you know what? I am set to have the best persimmon crop I've had in 10 years. Also set to have a bumper pawpaw harvest this year. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. It's not September yet. I don't know what I was thinking in February and March, but I started 3 times the number of Cape gooseberries, Inca berries, Physalis peruviana, whatever common name you want to use, than I do in any given year. I have them crammed in every hole all over my garden because I started way too many of them. Even as I was planting them out this spring, I was thinking like, oh gosh, like there's not enough room for all of these. What am I gonna do with all of these? I don't know if that was just providential or if perhaps the fact that it had been a cold and snowy winter and we were anticipated to come out of the drought we had been in, had something going in the back of my subconscious. I have a bazillion big, lush Physalis plants loaded with blossoms and immature fruit. I am set, again, if things stay on track, to have a huge harvest of Inca berries. So maybe that means I'm gonna have Inca berry jam this year instead of red raspberry jam. Maybe it means that I'm going to be making Inca berry tarts in the winter instead of making plum tarts. That's okay, just be a different year this year. I have added so much diversity in my garden that when 1 or 2 or 10 things fail, and believe me, it's crushing to my ego, it's crushing, putting that weight of doubt on me where my own self-doubt rises up because of the pressures that are put on me. When so many things fail, I've never had this many plants struggle in a given year. Even when we had drought years, I did not have this much of a hard time. I have so much else built into the system that I'm getting ample harvests. Our freezers are going to be stocked. My kitchen cupboards are going to be stocked. I'm going to get plenty of canning done. It looks like it's shaping up to be a wonderful year for my annual veggies. It looks like I'm going to have gajillions of mulberries in the garden that I'm going to put into my freezer. It looks like I am going to have additional harvests. Some things that usually fruited or produced kind of like a middle amount, they have somehow liked this weather that we've had, and I'm getting very large harvests of them on the horizon. So when you put diversity in your permaculture system, when you use permaculture principles in your design and you do not put all your eggs in one basket, you can withstand events like these. When you have crops that fail, that is not evidence that permaculture doesn't work. In fact, the fact that you can fall back on other harvests to balance out the failures and make sure that you still get a yield, permaculture principle, obtain a yield, you still get a yield in your garden, that is evidence unto itself that permaculture is effective. Permaculture works. It is something that helps us build resilience. We can use it in our garden design. We can use it in our community design. We can use it in our local food production design to build resilience into the system so that when we have undue pressures, when we have stresses, when we have burdens, when we have failures, that we do not suffer as people. I am not going to go hungry. I'm not going to have a dearth of fruit in my garden, and I'm not going to have a dearth of fruit in my pantry just because I had some things that didn't do well. That is what permaculture design brings to our gardens. It brings to our sense of peace. It brings to our ability to just take a deep breath and say okay, some things didn't do well, but all is not lost. All is not lost. And I hope that when you look at your permaculture design, maybe you don't do permaculture yet, but when you look at your garden design, you think of how you can add in more diversity so that when those inevitable years happen where it's a rough year for whatever crop, that all is not lost for you, that you still feel successful. You are successful as a gardener. All right, I am gonna go wash my very sticky mulberry hands and put a big bucket of mulberries into the freezer. I hope that you all tune back in soon. I have lots going on in my permaculture garden. I'm struggling with my laptop dying, so that means my editing may be a little less sexy for a while, and I hope that you all can understand that I'm editing on my phone instead of on my computer, but I'm gonna keep persevering and get it figured out. I will be back very soon. Please check out my Patreon down below or my PayPal if you are interested in supporting the work of this channel. Thanks.